Imagine the scene, a grand hall filled with the most important people in the city. Crystals reflecting golden lights, waiters serving champagne in crystal glasses, dresses that cost more than cars. And at the center of it all, her, the First Lady, powerful, influential, accustomed to having everything and everyone at her feet. Now imagine a man walking into that same hall, boots stained with dirt, a simple shirt, a straw hat held in his hands, completely out of place amid all that pomp and circumstance. What do you think happened? She humiliated him, in front of everyone, with words sharp as razors, with looks of contempt, with that kind of cruelty that only people who have never been humiliated themselves can display so easily. He didn't react. He didn't shout. He didn't answer back. He simply smiled, that calm smile of someone who knows something no one else in the room knows. And what did he know? He knew that without him, that entire city, including her husband, the mayor, would collapse before the end of the month. This is the story of how a woman learned, in the most painful way possible, that there are people in this world who hold so much power they don't need to prove anything to anyone, and how arrogance can destroy everything you've built in a single night. Because when you humiliate the wrong person, when you underestimate who truly moves the gears of power, you're not just making a social mistake. You're signing your own sentence of destruction. Stay until the end, because what happened after that night completely changed the power dynamics of an entire city. And the lesson this First Lady learned is something all of us need to hear. Real power doesn't wear a crown. Sometimes it wears boots stained with dirt. But before we begin, if you love stories where arrogant people discover, in the worst possible way, that they underestimated the wrong person, hit that like now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every week I bring stories that will make you question everything you think you know about power, humility, and justice. And comment below, have you ever seen someone arrogant get put in their place? What was it like? Now get ready, because this story will leave you jaw-dropped from beginning to end. The city of Hope Village had 23,000 inhabitants, 2 main squares, a century-old church, and a chronic problem. It depended entirely on a man no one really knew. His name was Antonio Ferreira, but everyone simply called him Mr. Antonio, the farmer. He was 62 years old, wore the same clothes he had worn for decades, drove a pickup truck that was probably older than some of the residents, and spoke so little that many doubted whether he even knew how to read properly. But Antonio was not just a farmer. He was the farmer, owner of 80% of the productive land surrounding the city, direct or indirect employer of nearly half of the economically active population, and the largest individual taxpayer Hope Village had ever seen. Over the last 30 years, since inheriting the first pieces of land from his father and multiplying them through hard work and intelligent decisions that no one ever gave him credit for, Antonio had been the invisible economic backbone of the city. He paid his taxes on time. He quietly sponsored the renovation of public schools. He donated equipment to the municipal hospital. He financed scholarships for underprivileged young people. But he did all of this so discreetly, through his lawyer and his accountant, that very few people knew the true extent of his contributions. To most residents, he was just another countryman who had been lucky enough to inherit good land. They greeted him politely when they saw him in town, but no one truly respected him. Respect, after all, was reserved for important people, and important people wore suits, not boots covered in mud. The First Lady of Hope Village was named Helena Andrade, and she was everything Antonio was not. 38 years old, a lawyer educated at a prestigious university in the capital, always with impeccably styled hair, designer clothes, and a shoe collection that could pay for the college tuition of 3 students. She had married Gustavo Andrade, the mayor, 5 years earlier, and since then had transformed her position into something far greater than a merely ceremonial title. Helena was not just the mayor's wife. She was the coordinator of all the city's social initiatives, honorary president of 4 local NGOs, and held an influence over her husband that everyone recognized but no one openly talked about. When Helena wanted something, it usually happened. When Helena didn't like someone, that person quickly learned what it meant to be on the wrong side of municipal power. Helena came from a wealthy family in the capital. Her father was a judge, her mother a university professor, and her siblings all held respected positions in large companies or public institutions. She had met Gustavo at a public administration conference, saw political potential in him that could be shaped, and decided that being the wife of a small-town mayor was a good first step before aiming for higher positions. Governor? Perhaps senator someday. Hope Village was just the beginning, and to execute those plans, Helena knew she needed to build the perfect image, the devoted wife, the engaged first lady, the woman who cared about the people. But behind that carefully constructed facade, Helena carried something that would eventually destroy everything: arrogance. The arrogance of someone who had never truly fought for anything, who had always had doors opened by her last name, who confused privilege with merit. The event that would change everything was announced 3 months in advance. A charity gala to raise funds for the construction of a new cultural center in the city. It would be the largest social event Hope Village had ever seen. Helena personally organized everything, from the decoration to the guest list. There would be an art auction, a gala dinner, and cultural performances. Tickets cost 500 reais, a fortune by local standards, but Helena argued it was necessary to keep the event exclusive. "We want people who can truly contribute," she explained in an interview with the local newspaper. "We can't fill the hall with just anyone." The phrase caused some discomfort, but Helena had the gift of making her words sound reasonable, even when they weren't. The weeks leading up to the event were frantic. Helena supervised every detail with obsessive attention. The flowers had to be imported from the capital, the champagne had to be French, the canapés had to be prepared by a chef she personally brought in. "This event," she declared to her team, "will put Hope Village on the map. It will show that we are not just any random countryside town. We have class, we have sophistication." No one dared ask who exactly they were trying to prove this to. The guest list was meticulously crafted. All the city's important business people received invitations. Politicians from neighboring towns, journalists from regional publications. Helena personally reviewed each name, adding some, crossing out others. "I don't want people who will stand out in the wrong way," she instructed the secretary helping her. "We need to maintain a certain standard." It was the secretary, a 50-year-old woman named Mrs. Lucia, who suggested, "Mrs. Helena, shouldn't we invite Mr. Antonio? He's one of the largest farmers in the region, and people say he makes many quiet donations." Helena frowned. She vaguely knew who Antonio was. She had seen him a few times from afar, always wearing those simple clothes, that unmistakable rural worker look. "The farmer," she said with subtle disdain. "Mrs. Lucia, this is a gala event, not a farm barbecue. I don't think he would feel comfortable in that environment. But they say he contributes a lot to the city." Mrs. Lucia insisted gently. "Maybe he would want to contribute to the cultural center as well." Helena sighed, the kind of sigh impatient people give when they feel they are explaining the obvious. "Look, I'm sure he's a good person within his limitations, but this event requires a certain refinement. You understand? I can't have someone showing up in work boots and a plaid shirt at a gala dinner. It would be embarrassing for him and for us. I'm doing him a favor by not inviting him." Mrs. Lucia didn't insist. She knew Helena well enough to know when arguing was useless, but she also knew Antonio, or at least knew his reputation, and had the feeling that Helena was making a mistake, a big one. But it wasn't her place to say anything. So she simply nodded and continued working, mentally crossing Antonio's name off the list. What Mrs. Lucia didn't know, what Helena didn't know, and what almost no one, except a very small group of people, knew, was that Antonio Ferreira was not just a successful farmer. He was one of the richest men in the entire state. His properties were worth tens of millions. His investments in agribusiness, stocks, and various funds amounted to a fortune that would have made Helena's eyes burn with envy if she had known. But more important than that, Antonio was the anonymous donor behind practically every major improvement Hope Village had experienced over the last 15 years. The hospital renovation? Antonio had donated 70% of the funds. The construction of the new wing of the municipal school. Antonio paid 80%. Fire department equipment. Antonio. The paving of 3 streets in the poorest neighborhood. Antonio. The scholarships that sent 5 young people per year to universities. Antonio. All of it done through his lawyer, Dr. Samuel, with the explicit condition that his name never be mentioned publicly. I don't do this for recognition, Antonio had told Dr. Samuel years earlier. I do it because it's the right thing to do, and because this city gave me everything I have. It's my duty to give back. Dr. Samuel had tried to argue that a little recognition wouldn't hurt, that Antonio deserved credit for his generosity, but Antonio was firm. The day people find out I have money, they'll see me differently. They'll treat me differently. They'll want things from me. I'd rather just be the simple farmer. That way I know who people really are. And so it had been for decades. Antonio continued living his simple life, waking up before sunrise, working his land, eating at modest restaurants, wearing clothes that had seen better days. And secretly, silently, he kept the city running. Only Dr. Samuel, Mr. Mario the accountant, and 2 trusted employees knew the full truth. To everyone else, Antonio was just a lucky farmer, hard-working, certainly, honest, without a doubt, but nothing special. Certainly not someone worthy of attending a sophisticated gala with the city's elite. Helena definitely did not consider him worthy, and she was about to discover the real cost of that judgment. The night of the gala arrived on a Friday in October. The event hall of the city's finest hotel had been completely transformed. White and gold fabrics adorned every surface. Enormous floral arrangements filled every corner. A jazz band hired from the capital played softly as the guests arrived. And what guests they were! Everyone dressed in their finest attire, women wearing sparkling jewelry, men in tuxedos rented or purchased, especially for the occasion. Helena was radiant in a navy blue dress that cost more than the monthly salary of most people present. She moved through the hall, greeting each guest, posing for photos, being filmed by a videographer she had hired to document the event. "This is a historic moment for our city," she declared to a camera, her smile perfect and well-practiced. "We are showing that Hope Village has class, has culture, has a future." Mayor Gustavo stood beside her, smiling, waving, playing his role. But even he seemed slightly uncomfortable with all the extravagance. He came from humble origins, the son of small shop owners, and events like this always made him feel like a bit of an imposter. But Helena had convinced him it was necessary. "We need to project success to attract investments," she had explained. "No one invests in places that look poor and backward." Everything was going perfectly. Guests sipped champagne, admired the decor, commented on how wonderful it was to finally see the city hosting sophisticated events. Helena was in her element, controlling every aspect, ensuring everything unfolded exactly as she had planned. And then, at approximately 8:40 p.m., and about an hour after the event began, the doors of the hall opened, and Antonio Ferreira walked in. He was dressed exactly as always, clean but faded jeans, a simple white shirt, Work boots he had polished, but that still showed signs of constant use, and his straw hat held in his hands. He had no invitation. He wasn't on the list. He had simply shown up. The music didn't stop, but there was an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere of the hall. Heads turned. Conversations hesitated for a second. Who was that man? Why was he dressed like that? This was a formal event. Antonio calmly walked to the reception table at the entrance, where two young volunteers were checking names. "Good evening," he said in that calm voice that rarely rose above what was necessary. "I came to see about contributing to the cultural center." One of the receptionists, a girl of maybe 22 who didn't know Antonio, looked him up and down with barely concealed surprise. "Sir," she said, trying to be polite but clearly uncomfortable, "this is a private event. Invitation only." "I understand," Antonio nodded, "but I heard it was to raise funds. I thought about making a contribution." "Contributions are through ticket purchases or bids at the auction," the girl explained, still glancing at Antonio's dirt-stained boots with discomfort. "Tickets cost 500 reais. Antonio pulled his old wallet from his back pocket. It was leather, worn by time, probably older than the receptionist herself. He opened it and took out 5 100 real bills, placing them carefully on the table. "Here it is," he said simply. The receptionist took the money, still looking uneasy. She glanced at her colleague, who shrugged. "Technically, anyone who paid could enter, right?" "All right," she finally said. "Welcome to the event." She stamped a paper to serve as an improvised ticket and handed it to Antonio. He thanked her with a nod and entered the main hall. What happened in the following minutes would be remembered in Hope Village for years. Antonio walked slowly through the hall, his boots making a slightly different sound on the marble floor than the dress shoes of the other guests. He observed everything with that calm, attentive gaze few people ever truly noticed: the expensive decorations, the champagne in crystal glasses, the people laughing and chatting in their elegant clothes. He didn't seem intimidated, nor impressed, just observant. Some people noticed him and murmured among themselves. "Who is that?" "I think he's one of the local farmers." "What is he doing here?" Someone should have stopped him at the entrance. Helena was on the other side of the hall, speaking with an important businessman from a neighboring city, when her assistant, a young woman named Carolina, discreetly approached. "Mrs. Helena," she whispered, "we have a situation." "Oh, what situation?" Helena asked, barely diverting her attention from the conversation. "A man came in dressed very inappropriately for the event." Now Helena paid attention. She excused herself from the businessman and turned to Carolina. "What do you mean, inappropriate?" "He's wearing work boots and a simple shirt," Carolina explained, looking embarrassed just describing it. "I think he's a farmer or something. He paid for a ticket, so the reception girls let him in, but—" "Where is he?" Helena asked, her voice hardening. Carolina discreetly pointed. Helena followed the direction and saw Antonio, who at that moment was standing near the drinks table, politely accepting a glass of water from a confused waiter. Helena's eyes narrowed. She vaguely recognized him. The farmer Mrs. Lucia had suggested inviting and whom she had dismissed as inappropriate. "He has some nerve," Helena murmured, more to herself than to Carolina, "coming here dressed like that." "What would you like me to do?" Carolina asked. "Nothing," Helena said, her mind already working. "I'll handle this myself." She crossed the hall with determined steps, her navy blue dress flowing dramatically. Several people noticed and instinctively fell silent, sensing that something was about to happen. Helena stopped less than a meter from Antonio, who was calmly sipping his glass of water. "Excuse me," Helena said, her voice polite but with steel underneath. "May I help you with something?" Antonio turned toward her, his calm eyes meeting hers. "Good evening, ma'am," he said politely. No, thank you. I just came to see the event and perhaps contribute to the cause. I see, Helena said, her smile not reaching her eyes. And you are? Antonio Ferreira. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Helena looked at his hand, calloused, clean but with short nails, the hand of someone who works the land, and visibly hesitated before briefly shaking it. I am Helena Andrade, the First Lady, she said, as if he didn't know. I organized this event. It turned out very beautiful, Antonio commented sincerely, looking around. Must have taken a lot of work. It did, Helena agreed. A lot of work, and a lot of investment to ensure everything was perfect. She paused meaningfully, her eyes scanning Antonio's clothing in an obvious way. This is a formal event, as you can see. Yes, I noticed, Antonio said calmly. People are well dressed. Exactly, Helena said, her voice growing sharper. It's a gala event. We have a dress code. We expected guests to present themselves appropriately. The silence that followed was heavy. Some people nearby had stopped talking, sensing the tension. Antonio looked at his own clothes, then back at Helena. I came as I am, he said simply. I don't have a suit. I don't usually wear one. I can see that, Helena said. And now there was clear contempt in her voice. She was no longer trying to hide it. Mr. Antonio, I appreciate your attempt to participate, but I need to be honest. This event is for people of a certain caliber. People who understand the importance of presentation, of social etiquette. Some people nearby discreetly gasped. This was becoming uncomfortable. Helena, Mayor Gustavo had approached, lightly touching his wife's arm. Maybe this isn't the moment to— No, Gustavo, Helena interrupted without looking at him. This is exactly the moment. We can't maintain standards if we don't enforce them. She turned her attention back to Antonio, who remained calm, his face showing no anger or embarrassment, just that same tranquil expression. Mr. Antonio, Helena continued, her voice loud enough now for more people to hear, I'm sure you're a hard-working person within your capacities, but there are appropriate places for each type of person, a farm barbecue, a local bar. Those are environments where someone with your presentation would feel more comfortable. This, she gestured toward the elegant hall, is not that place. Helena, Gustavo said more firmly now, clearly embarrassed. You're being rude. I'm being practical, Helena replied, and honest. What's kinder, leaving him here feeling out of place or explaining that this is not his environment? Antonio still hadn't spoken. He simply observed Helena with that calm expression, and something in his eyes, not anger, not humiliation, but something deeper, should have warned her. It should have made her stop. But she was too immersed in her moment of power, too confident in her position, too certain of her superiority to notice. You know what's worst, Helena continued, seemingly unable to stop now that she had begun. People like you don't even realize how out of place you are. You think paying 500 reais gives you the right to be in any environment. But money doesn't buy class, Mr. Antonio. It doesn't buy refinement. It doesn't buy the kind of education and upbringing that allow a person to move properly in society. The hall was silent now, all eyes fixed on the scene, some horrified, some embarrassed, some, sadly enough, quietly agreeing with Helena in their own unspoken prejudices. Gustavo looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. He knew his wife, knew her elitism, but had never seen her display it so openly. My suggestion, Helena said, her tone now condescending as if explaining something simple to a child, is that you retrieve your 500 reais at the reception and go home. Save that money. I'm sure it's a lot for someone in your position. Use it on something more, appropriate to your level. And in the future, when you see events like this being announced, understand that they are meant for a specific audience. Don't take it personally. It's simply how society works. She crossed her arms, clearly satisfied with herself for having handled the situation so well. Antonio finally placed his glass of water on a nearby table. He looked around the hall, his eyes passing over the watching faces, the expensive decorations, the entire display of extravagance. Then his gaze returned to Helena. "Are you finished?" he asked calmly. "Yes," Helena said, believing she had won. "I hope you understood." "I understood perfectly," Antonio replied. And then he smiled, not an embarrassed smile, not the smile of someone humiliated, a calm, almost sad smile of someone who knew something no one else in the room knew. "Just one question before I leave," he said. "Do you know how much this entire event cost?" Helena blinked, confused by the change of subject. "I don't see how that's relevant, but yes, approximately 120,000 reais between decoration, food, entertainment and do you know how much the city government contributed to that cost?" Antonio continued. "Half," Helena replied, still confused but beginning to feel irritated. 60,000 reais from the municipal budget for cultural events. "And do you know where the municipal budget comes from?" Antonio asked, that smile still on his face. "From taxes, obviously," Helena said, as if explaining the obvious to an idiot. "Tax revenue from the city." "Exactly," Antonio agreed. "And do you know who the largest individual taxpayer in Hope Village is? Who alone pays approximately 42% of the city's total tax revenue?" Helena fell silent. Something in the air was changing. Who is responsible for employing, directly or indirectly, nearly half of this city's workforce? Antonio continued, his voice still calm but now carrying weight. Who has donated, over the last 15 years, more than 8 million reais to improvements in schools, hospitals and infrastructure, always anonymously, without asking for recognition or thanks? Helena was pale now. She was beginning to understand. Who ensured, Antonio went on, that during the pandemic none of his employees, and there are 223 in total, lost their jobs or salaries, while other companies were laying people off? Who personally funded masks and hand sanitizer for free distribution throughout the entire city? Gustavo had covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes wide. He had just made the connection Helena was reaching slowly, painfully. "And who," Antonio said, his eyes fixed on Helena, "donated just last week 300,000 reais specifically for the construction of the cultural center this event is meant to raise funds for? 300,000, Mrs. Helena, nearly 3 times what this entire event will probably raise." The silence in the hall was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. "It was you," Helena whispered, the realization hitting her like a train. "All this time, the anonymous donor, it was you." "It was," Antonio confirmed. He looked around the hall once more. Nice venue, beautiful decorations, expensive food. "But you know what I see here? I see people more concerned with looking important than with actually being important. I see public money being spent on French champagne while the pediatric wing of the municipal hospital needs new equipment. I see an event that cost 120,000 reais, when with half of that, an entire library could have been built in the poor neighborhood." He placed his straw hat on his head. "You are right about one thing, Mrs. Helena. I don't belong in this place, not because I am too simple, but because I prefer to spend my time and money on things that truly matter. Good evening." Antonio began to turn to leave. "Wait," Helena cried, her voice sharp, desperate. "Mister Antonio, please, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, would you have treated me differently?" Antonio asked, turning back. "That is exactly the problem, Mrs. Helena. You treat people according to how much you think they are worth, and you judge their worth by the shoes they wear, the clothes they dress in, the car they drive. Never by character, by work, by the real contribution they make to the world." he sighed. "I wasn't offended by being treated poorly. I've been treated poorly before, and I will be again. But it saddens me to see that the person responsible for representing this city, the person who should value every citizen equally, is someone who judges others so superficially." "Please," Helena said, tears now in her eyes, not tears of genuine emotion, but of panic. She was quickly realizing the implications of what she had just done. "Let me fix this. You can stay, I'll make a speech, I'll recognize your contributions." "I don't want recognition," Antonio said firmly. "I never did. I did what I did because it was right, not for praise. But I will no longer do it through this administration." He looked at Gustavo, who seemed to want to disappear. "Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, I will need a meeting with you on Monday to discuss redirecting my future contributions." "Redirecting?" Gustavo asked, his voice weak. "I will continue contributing to Hope Village," Antonio explained, "but I will do so directly with institutions, schools, hospitals, serious NGOs, no longer through City Hall. I no longer trust that my money will be used the way I intend." But we have projects planned," Gustavo stammered. "The cultural center, the plaza renovation, the new sports pavilion, they all depend on your contributions." "Depend," Antonio repeated. "You built an entire budget depending on money that isn't yours, from a donor you didn't even respect enough to invite to the very event celebrating what he's paying for." The weight of those words fell over the hall like a bomb. "I will continue helping the city," Antonio said, "but on my terms, without intermediaries who spend 60,000 reais on champagne and decorations when they could spend 20 and use the rest for something useful." He turned again to leave. "Mr. Antonio," it was Mrs. Lucia, the secretary who had suggested inviting him weeks earlier. She had approached, tears in her eyes. "I tried to tell her to invite you. I tried." Antonio smiled at her, genuine and warm. "I know, Mrs. Lucia. You have always been kind to me, and thank you for that." He looked one last time at Helena, who stood frozen in the middle of the hall, completely shattered, tears running down her face and ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Do you know what the irony is, Mrs. Helena?" Antonio said. "I came here tonight prepared to double my contribution to the cultural center. I was going to announce a donation of another 300,000 reais, totaling 600,000. More than enough to build not just a cultural center, but one of the best in the region. I came ready to sign the check tonight." He lightly tapped his shirt pocket. "But then you taught me something important. You taught me that sometimes the best contribution we can make is not giving money, but withdrawing it. Forcing people to rethink their priorities, their values, the way they treat others." With that, Antonio walked out of the hall. His boots echoed on the marble floor, the sound fading until the door closed behind him. The silence left behind was deafening. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Everyone processing what had just happened. Then, slowly, people began to move. Some left quietly, too embarrassed to stay. Others gathered in small groups, murmuring in shock. And Helena? Helena stood motionless in the center of the hall, her expensive dress suddenly looking excessive, her jewelry feeling too heavy, all that luxury around her suddenly seeming empty and meaningless. "Gustavo," she said weakly, turning to her husband. But Gustavo was looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. Disappointment, deep, genuine disappointment. "You destroyed everything," he said calmly. "In 5 minutes, you destroyed years of work, of building trust, of maintaining a relationship with the man who literally keeps this city standing." "I didn't know," Helena protested. "How was I supposed to know?" "You should have treated him with respect regardless of knowing," Gustavo snapped, his voice rising for the first time she could remember. "He could have been the poorest man in the city and still deserved basic respect. But no, you had to humiliate him publicly because he wasn't wearing a suit. Gustavo, I can fix this, Helena said desperately. I can go to him, apologize. You think apologies will fix this? Gustavo asked incredulously. You just cut off our main source of funding for every social program we had planned. The cultural center you're so obsessed with? Dead. The sports pavilion for underprivileged kids? Dead. The plaza renovation? Dead. He ran his hands through his hair, desperate. And you know what's worst? He's right. He's absolutely right. We spent 60,000 rees on this display. We could have held a simple event, spent 20, and used the other 40 for something useful. But no, it had to be French champagne and imported flowers, because heaven forbid Hope Village looked like what it is, a small countryside town. I just wanted, Helena began, but she couldn't finish. Because what? What did she want? To impress whom? To prove what? You wanted to feel important, Gustavo said, reading her thoughts. You wanted to feel superior, and in the process, you drove away the most important person this city has. He looked around the hall, at the embarrassed guests, at the expensive decorations. Go home, Helena. I'm ending the event. I'll apologize to everyone and send them home. But the auction, the dinner, it's over, Gustavo said firmly. Everything is over. As Helena left the hall, feeling everyone's eyes on her, a single question echoed in her mind. How had she ruined everything so completely, so quickly? But deep down she knew the answer. Arrogance, pure, simple, destructive pride. And now she would pay the price. By Monday morning, the story had already spread throughout Hope Village. In a small town, news travels fast, and this was far too big to contain. Everyone was talking about how the First Lady had publicly humiliated the man who secretly financed half the town. The details varied with each retelling. Some versions exaggerated what Helena had said, others softened it. But the core was the same. And the public reaction was not good for Helena. At the market, the bakery, the gas station, people talked. I always knew she was stuck up, one woman said. I never liked her. Too arrogant. Poor Mr. Antonio, a shopkeeper commented. Hard-working man, honest, does so much for the town and gets treated like that. They say he's going to stop donating, another whispered. They say City Hall will have to cut half the social programs. The local newspaper, which was usually careful not to criticize the administration too harshly, published a respectful but firm editorial questioning the city's priorities in the use of public funds. While we spend 60,000 reais on a gala event, the editorial read, our greatest anonymous benefactor feels disrespected and undervalued. Perhaps it is time to reflect on what truly matters in public administration. At 9 o'clock Monday morning, Antonio arrived at City Hall for the meeting he had requested. He entered the building as always, boots, jeans, simple shirt, but this time people looked at him differently. With respect, with gratitude, with a bit of shame for never truly seeing him before. Good morning, Mr. Antonio, the receptionist said with a genuine smile. The mayor is waiting for you. In the mayor's office, Gustavo looked visibly exhausted. He clearly hadn't slept much over the weekend. With him were Dr. Samuel, Antonio's lawyer, and Mr. Mario, the accountant. Mr. Antonio, Gustavo began, standing up. First, let me say how deeply sorry I am for what happened on Friday. There is no excuse for how my wife treated you. I appreciate the apology, Antonio said, sitting down, but it wasn't necessary. You don't have to apologize for someone else's behavior, even if she is your wife. Still, Gustavo insisted, it happened at an official event, representing this administration, and it was unacceptable. Antonio nodded. Then let's talk about the future. As I explained on Friday, I will continue contributing to Hope Village, but no longer through municipal funds that can be redirected. Dr. Samuel opened a folder. We have established a foundation, he explained. The Hope Village Development Foundation. It will have an independent board made up of community representatives, school principals, hospital doctors, community leaders, local business owners. Antonio will be the main donor, but he will not have direct control over where the funds go. This ensures the money goes where it is truly needed, not where politics or vanity direct it. And what about the projects already planned? Gustavo asked, clearly concerned. The cultural center? The cultural center will be built, Antonio said. But differently, more modest, more functional, less ostentatious. It will cost 300,000, not 600. And the other 300 I was going to donate will go toward equipping the municipal school with a complete digital library. And the sports pavilion? Gustavo asked hopefully. That will happen too, Antonio confirmed. But it will be managed by the foundation, not by City Hall. It will be a true community space, not a political tool. Gustavo nodded, clearly relieved but also humbled. Thank you. The city needs these things. I know, Antonio said. That's why I'll keep helping. But, Mr. Mayor, you need to understand one thing. My issue isn't with you or with City Hall itself. It's with misplaced priorities. It's with spending 60,000 on an event that feeds egos when that money could feed real families. You're right, Gustavo admitted. Completely right. And I'm going to make changes. I already have. I cancelled 3 expensive cultural events Helena had planned. We'll do simpler versions, spending a quarter of what was planned and using the rest for direct social programs. That's a start, Antonio said. And Helena? Gustavo sighed. She's dealing with the consequences. She's received some not-so-polite calls from people who heard about what happened. She's considering stepping away from public functions for a while. She doesn't need to do that, Antonio said, surprising everyone. Excuse me? Gustavo blinked. She made a mistake. A big one, yes. But people make mistakes. If she truly learns from this, she may do more good in the future than harm in the past. You're very generous, Gustavo said. It's not generosity, Antonio corrected. It's pragmatism. A humble First Lady who understands what matters can do a lot of good. A First Lady removed by scandal helps no one. He stood, signaling the meeting was ending. But she really needs to change, not just appear to change. Truly understand that a person's value doesn't come from clothes, cars, or last names. It comes from character and contribution. With that, Antonio left City Hall, leaving Gustavo and the lawyers to finalize the legal details of the foundation. In the days that followed, something interesting happened in Hope Village. Antonio's story, not the humiliation, but his real contributions, began to circulate more widely. People discovered that the hospital renovation that saved lives, Antonio. The scholarships that sent their children to university, Antonio. The fire department equipment that responded quickly to last year's fire, Antonio. And people began to see him differently, not with flattery, not with special treatment, but with genuine respect and gratitude. At the market, people greeted him warmly. Mr. Antonio, thank you for everything you do, a mother said, stopping him. My daughter is at university because of that scholarship. She's the first in the family to go to college. I'm glad, Antonio replied sincerely. Is she doing well? Very well. She wants to become a doctor and come back to work at the hospital here. We'll need good doctors, Antonio smiled. I'm glad I could help. But most importantly, Antonio did not change. He still wore the same clothes, still drove the same pickup truck, still ate at the same modest restaurant. Recognition didn't change him because he had never needed recognition to begin with. As for Helena, she spent 2 weeks almost completely secluded, dealing with shame and public humiliation. But then, surprisingly, she did something no one expected. She asked for a meeting with Antonio. Antonio agreed to meet her at a simple cafe in the city center. When Helena arrived, without heavy makeup, without flashy jewelry, wearing simple clothes, many people didn't recognize her at first. "Mr. Antonio," she said, sitting down, "thank you for agreeing to see me." "You're welcome," Antonio said calmly. "What can I do for you?" Helena took a deep breath. "I want to apologize, truly. Not a political apology, not an apology because I'm the First Lady and need to fix my image. A real apology from someone who made a serious mistake to another person." Antonio waited, listening. "What I did was horrible," Helena continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It was prejudiced, elitist, cruel. And the worst part is that it wasn't even about you specifically. It's how I've always been, how I was raised, judging people by appearances, by looks, by social position." She wiped away a tear. "My parents always emphasized status. Studying at the best schools, knowing the right people, marrying well, climbing socially, and I internalized that so deeply that I forgot people aren't their last names or their shoes. They are their actions, their character." "That's an important realization," Antonio said, "but realization alone isn't enough. What matters is what you do with it." "I know," Helena agreed, "and I want to change, truly. I don't know if you can teach me or if I'm too far gone, but I want to try." Antonio studied her for a long moment. "Why do you want to change?" "Because I'm ashamed of who I was," Helena admitted. "Because I look back and see all the times I judged people, all the times I treated someone as inferior just because they didn't have what I had. And it disgusts me. I want to be better." "Then I'll make you a proposal," Antonio said. "A proposal?" Helena blinked, surprised. "You want to learn? Truly learn what matters, about real work, about genuine contribution? Then come work with me, not as First Lady making ceremonial visits, as a real volunteer. Once a week, you will spend an entire day working on one of the community projects my foundation funds." Helena fell silent, processing. "You will serve food at the community kitchen," Antonio continued. "You'll help paint the school. You'll sit with families who benefit from the scholarships and listen to their stories. You'll understand in practice where the money goes and why it matters." "I accept," Helena said without hesitation. "When do I start?" And she truly did. Every Tuesday for months, Helena showed up, without excessive makeup, without jewelry, in simple work clothes, and worked. At first it was difficult. She wasn't used to physical labor. She didn't know how to talk to ordinary people without sounding condescending. But she tried, truly tried. She served food to homeless people and listened to their stories, painted walls alongside local volunteers and learned about their lives, sat with mothers whose children received scholarships and saw the real impact opportunity makes. And slowly, genuinely, she began to change, not in 1 month, not in 2, but over nearly a year of consistent work, Helena Andrade transformed. She began proposing ideas at City Hall, not ostentatious events, but practical programs. A food bank, a job training program, partnerships with local businesses to create employment. "Where was this Helena 2 years ago?" Gustavo asked one day, half joking, half serious. "Lost," Helena replied honestly, "but I'm trying to find myself." 1 year after that fateful night at the gala, the Hope Village Development Foundation organized an event. Not an expensive gala, but a simple community barbecue in the main square. It cost 5,000 reais to organize. There was local music, simple but plentiful food, and everyone was invited, rich, poor, workers, business owners, everyone. On the improvised stage, Gustavo gave a brief speech. "1 year ago," he said, "we learned an important lesson about what truly matters. It's not appearance, it's not ostentation, it's real contribution, honest work, and treating all people with dignity." He looked toward where Antonio was sitting modestly among the crowd. "We are fortunate to have someone who taught us this, not with words, but with actions. Mr. Antonio, thank you for everything you do and for who you are." The crowd applauded. Antonio simply nodded, embarrassed by the attention. After the speech, Helena went up on stage. "1 year ago," she began, her voice firm but humble, "I made the worst mistake of my life. I judged someone by appearances and treated him with disrespect and cruelty out of pure prejudice." She looked directly at Antonio. "Mr. Antonio, I know I've apologized before, but I want to do it publicly. I'm sorry for being so blind, so arrogant, so completely wrong about what truly matters in this world. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn, for teaching me that value comes from character, not from a bank account." She took a deep breath. "And to everyone here, don't be like I was. Don't judge. Don't assume you know someone's worth by how they dress or how they speak. Because very often, the most valuable people are the most humble. And if you fail to see that, you will lose something precious." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then others joined in, until the entire square was applauding, not for Helena, but for the message, for the lesson. Later that night, when most people had already gone home and only a few volunteers were cleaning up, Antonio approached Helena. "You did a good job this year," he said. "You truly changed." "I still have a lot to improve," Helena admitted, "but I'm trying." "That's all anyone can do," Antonio replied. "Try to be better, learn, grow." He looked around the square, at the city he loved. "You know, when I left that gala a year ago, I was furious. Not because I was disrespected, but because I saw so much waste, so much focus on the wrong things. I thought about giving up on the city, letting you all fend for yourselves." "Why didn't you?" Helena asked. "Because giving up would have been easy," Antonio said, "and I've never been one to do easy things. Besides, I realized that if I simply walked away, nothing would change. But if I stayed, if I forced a change in perspective, maybe I could make a real difference." "You did," Helena said with conviction. "You changed this city. You changed me." Antonio smiled. "You changed yourself. I just gave you a push." They stood in silence for a moment, comfortable and respectful. "Mr. Antonio," Elena finally said, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why did you keep helping? Even after what I did, after having every right to abandon us, why did you keep donating, helping, contributing?" Antonio thought for a moment before answering. "Because the city is not you, Helena. The city is Mrs. Maria, who works at the bakery. It's Zay, who repairs bicycles. It's teacher Anna, who teaches the children. It's Dr. Pedro, who works at the hospital. They are the ones who truly make Hope Village function, and they didn't deserve to be punished for one person's mistake." He began walking toward his old pickup truck. "And besides," he said over his shoulder, "I learned a long time ago that holding grudges only poisons the one who holds them. It's easier to forgive and move on." Helena watched him leave. That simple man who had more wisdom in his little finger than she had in her entire body a year earlier. And she promised herself she would never forget the lesson, that true value does not come from position, wealth, or appearance. It comes from how you treat people, especially when you think they have nothing to offer, because sometimes the people who seem to have the least are the ones who have the most to give, and those who seem to have everything are the ones who truly have nothing. Antonio got into his pickup truck, started the engine that was already a bit tired, and drove home. Another day in Hope Village. Another day contributing quietly, working honestly, living with purpose. The boots were still dirty with soil, the shirt was still simple, the hat was still old. But the man? The man was rich in every way that truly mattered. And the city finally saw it, finally understood it. and everyone was better for it. 2 years after that gala night, Hope Village was transformed. Not in its physical appearance. It was still the same small-town place, without tall buildings or wide avenues, but in its essence, its values, and how people treated one another. The cultural center was built, modest but functional, with a digital library, rooms for free courses, and space for performances. It cost 300,000, just as Antonio had said, not the 600 Helena had planned to spend on ostentation. The sports pavilion was finished, always full of children learning basketball, volleyball, martial arts. Everything free, everything managed by trained volunteers. The municipal school now had one of the best digital libraries in the region. The hospital had received new equipment. The community kitchen fed 60 families a day, all through the Hope Village Development Foundation, all funded primarily by a man who still wore the same boots. And Helena had become the kind of First Lady Hope Village truly needed, not one who organized expensive events, but one who worked directly with the community, who knew people by name, who knew their stories and their struggles. Gustavo was re-elected with 82% of the vote. Not because of political marketing or empty promises, but because under his administration, guided by the values Antonio had demonstrated, the city had genuinely improved. On election night, during the celebration in the square, someone shouted, "Where's Mr. Antonio? He should be here!" The crowd agreed, beginning to look for him. They found him at the edge of the square, calmly talking with Zay, the bicycle repairman, about a new tool Zay had acquired. "Mr. Antonio," Gustavo called, approaching. "Come here! You need to be on stage with us." "I don't need to," Antonio smiled. "I'm fine right here." "But you're the reason all of this works," Gustavo insisted. "No," Antonio corrected gently. "Everyone is the reason. I only help with money, but you're the ones who do the real work. You're the ones who build, who care, who keep things running." He looked around the square filled with happy people, children running, families celebrating. "This," he said, "is what matters. Not recognition, not credit. Just this, a community functioning, people taking care of each other." Helena, who had joined the group, said softly, "You taught us that, all of us." "I didn't teach anything you didn't already know deep down," Antonio replied. "I just helped you remember." And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the most important people are not the ones under the spotlight, on stages, or in positions of power. They are the ones who work quietly behind the scenes, doing good without needing applause, contributing without needing recognition, being valuable simply because they choose to be. Antonio Ferreira never changed his boots, never replaced his pickup truck, never bought expensive clothes or flaunted his wealth, but he changed an entire city, not with money alone, but with example. The example that real value has nothing to do with appearance, that humility is not weakness, it is strength, that contributing without seeking credit is the purest form of generosity, and that sometimes the person wearing the most expensive suit in the room is the least important, while the person in muddy boots may be the one who keeps the world running. Hope Village learned that lesson the hardest way possible. But it learned it, and it became better because of it. Much better. And in his old pickup truck, driving home under the Texas stars, Antonio smiled. Not a smile of victory, but of satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you did something that mattered, that you contributed, that you made a difference. Even if no one knew your name, even if no one praised you, even if no one saw you. Because in the end, the best things we do are the ones no one sees, and the most valuable people are often the most invisible, until someone makes the mistake of underestimating them. Then everyone discovers, too late, just how much they mattered, and that discovery changes everything.